the breaking news we continue to follow out of the Diamond area on the boulevard at the Greyhound bus station. An active shooting scene has just wrapped up.
A gunman appeared at the front of one of the theaters. He threw some type of canister which started releasing some kind of gas, and then he opened fire.
We know that at least 20 people were killed. We are now being told by Carillion's spokesperson that 4 patients are at the New River Valley Medical Center. 3 of those are in stable condition, and 1 is...
I got on the floor because really had no other option of where to go, and as the 2 students tried to push their desk to the door, he pushed his way in and he shot them first. Went to the other side of the classroom and took an active shooter stance there. And in those seconds of, again, panic and confusion, I looked up. I think I wanted to understand what was happening. I mean, it happened so quickly, from hearing something in the hallway to being physically present in our room. And when he bursts in, he doesn't say anything, he doesn't pause, he just opens fire. And I had the thought of, brace yourself, your turn is gonna come. I didn't really understand what that meant. I didn't have the words of someone is shooting in my classroom, but I could sense that it felt almost like a heat wave, like a very evil heat wave coming closer and closer and closer. The first time that he shot me was in the back, and it feels like, when I describe it to students or to law enforcement, like a very kind of quick, sharp sting, like a very hot pinch. And he left our classroom. He came back the second time, which was scarier than the first time, because the first time it happened so quickly, we didn't have time to be afraid. Every single person but 1 in my classroom was shot. The minimum was 3, 1 person was shot 19 times. It was actually pretty still. But the second time, you could tell he was looking to see who was alive. And so I tried to kind of stay low and keep myself from breathing and keep myself from panting and just be very still in that space. And so I was shot again in the butt. I used to kind of fib and say it was the back, it was actually the butt. And a third ricochet bullet that went through the back of my toe. He left, he came back for a third time, and eventually took his own life in front of our classroom. So in those 10, 12 minutes, he fired 174 rounds, 61 of which were in my classroom. So it was obviously a very, unfortunately, very deep, impactful 10 minutes of our lives. This day changed my life, and it changed my perception and my thoughtfulness towards personal safety and security. I learned through a very painful and vivid experience that at the end of the day, the decisions that we make about our own safety, our own security, our own well-being are all up to ourselves. And so it's our job to educate ourselves, to build relationships with law enforcement, with local fire EMS, to know what their response will be like. It is our responsibility to know what the threats and the risks and the hazards may be. And so active shooter is just one of those components.
We have seen in the history of active shooter events of what have been and not been called terrorist events, whether it's explosions, whether it is active shooter events, whatever, they have happened in all sorts of different places. We've seen them at churches, we have seen them at schools, we have seen them at malls, we've seen them at ballparks, we've seen them at recreational facilities, at places of employment. They can happen anywhere. They can happen everywhere.
Unfortunately, over the last several years, the trend of active shooter events has increased. Annually, we're averaging approximately 16 to 17 active shooter events. Approximately 70% of active shooter events occur in places of commerce or places of education. And the vast majority of events are actually done in 5 minutes or less. The one positive is that the general public is better educated and more aware and on firmer footing on what to do if they find themselves in an active shooter event.
Truthfully, active shooter is a part of our reality. It is something that I think is worth talking about in advance, because the likelihood of it happening in a school might be low, but also as you think about shopping malls and workspaces or airports, there really is no, pattern to where these events happen. They can happen anywhere. And while they're very low in frequency, they're very high in impact, and they escalate very quickly. And that individual, or individuals in that sense, their intent is to injure as many people as possible. And so the faster we can have a chance to respond, not only can we help save our own lives, but we can also build a resiliency of us in that response.
In my mind, these events are survivable, and they require us to do a couple different things. The change of mindset is a big factor in the survivability of an active shooter incident. And that starts with what we call situational awareness, and that's simply being aware of where you are and what's around you when you are out somewhere. For example, you and your friends, your family, whoever are at the mall shopping. Do you know where the closest exits are? Do you know how to get out quickly? Do you know where you are in relation to the parking lot, where your vehicle is, and so forth and so on, so that if you had to get out of that building quickly for any reason, a fire drill, a weather emergency, or an active shooter, would you know how to do that? And secondly is to put within yourself that mindset of no matter what happens during an active shooter situation, I am going to survive this, I am going to get out of it.
Preparation kind of helps so you don't have a panic moment where it just happens, you're not prepared, you haven't thought things through, and you just lock up and freeze. What we want people to do is kind of think through the process, think through the shooting, any type of emergency they have, and make sure they know what steps to take, where they need to go, who they need to call to make sure they can minimize the loss of life if possible.
If you find yourself in an active shooter situation, there's three things that you can do. You can run, you can hide, or as a last resort, you can fight.
Well, the best advice is to try to get out of it as quickly as possible, which is why the Department of Homeland Security and the federal government teaches the concept of run, hide, and fight.
The first priority is to run and get yourself out of harm's way, while encouraging others to leave as well. A very important piece of the run is to first identify what direction the threat is coming from and go the other way.
Your objective is to get out of the area as quickly as possible. Take others with you if you can, but don't let them slow you down.
You just want to try to help people. That's a natural inclination to help people in a situation, especially if there's a shooting situation. But you have to worry about your own safety. I mean, some people may freeze up. You're trying to get them out of the building. If they don't want to go, you're just going to have to leave them. If you can stop people from coming into a building or into a scene, try to warn them ahead of time, do so. If they don't listen, again, don't take the time to try to convince them to go. Just get out for your safety as much as possible.
If you're running out of the building, if the active shooter event is happening in a building or any place, keep your hands visible. Make sure you keep your hands visible, spread your fingers out, and make sure that law enforcement knows that you're not a threat, and keep following their instructions.
Go out the way that we came in, stay as calm as possible, keep your hands in sight at all times. The reason for that is when we're going into a situation, we have no idea who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. And oftentimes they look a lot alike.
If you can't run out of the building, maybe the main entrance to the area is blocked and you can't exit the building, you want to try to hide.
What you should do is look for a secure hiding place, preferably one in which you can lock the doors, put heavy objects in front of it, turn the lights off, silence all of your phones and all of your electronic devices, and stay as quiet as possible.
The most important aspect is you do not want that shooter to know where you're at.
And you don't want to go somewhere where your movement's kind of restricted. You don't want to go hide in a broom closet. You want to probably get into a room where maybe you can exit to another room if the person gets into that room, or there's another hiding spot within the room that you can go to.
Generally, in an active shooter incident, the shooters are looking for easy targets. And if you can lock yourself behind a door in some place that is secure, ideally one that will stop bullets, like concrete or brick or metal, then you have increased your chances of survivability very much.
Your last option in any active shooter incident is to fight. If you can't run out of the building, you've hidden, and maybe they've gotten to your location, you can't find a hiding location, you have to fight. And again, you have to think that this person has some type of a weapon, maybe a firearm or a knife or something of that nature, so you have to use a weapon as well. So you kind of have to be inventive, you have to look around, anything you can think of, a fire extinguisher, a chair, anything you can think of to use to fight this person as an improvised weapon.
I highly recommend fire extinguishers, and the reason for that is that they do three things. Number one, by discharging the fire extinguisher, you create a visible barrier so it's hard for the shooter to see. Secondly, at least for a few seconds, it will deprive oxygen from the immediate area where you've discharged the spray, so it will make it hard for the shooter to breathe. And lastly, a fire extinguisher is a large steel object, which obviously is great for defending yourself and saving your life.
whatever you do and whatever action is, whether it's fighting back or hiding, you have to commit to that action. And so whatever you do, do it with full force, because it is up to you or them. They are there to hurt you, and so you should not hold back in any capacity with what you have to do.
It is unfortunate that we have to think this way when we teach people this, and I know it's going to be different for a lot of people when they first hear that, oh, I have to fight somebody. But again, it's your life. That's your last resort. No one's going to come help you at that point because you're on your own. You know, the police are on their way. They're going to try to get there as quickly as possible, but it's just you and the attacker, and you have to do whatever is necessary to stop that attack and save your life or save somebody else's life.
When it is safe to do so and you have safely gotten out of the area, we ask that you call 911 and give them as much information about the incident as you can so that law enforcement, fire, and EMS can quickly respond to that area and give the help that we need to give.
Henrico 911, what's the address of your emergency? Okay, what is the address, ma'am?
When you make the call to 911, first and foremost, we need to know where the shooter is, how many shooters there are, what they look like, what they're wearing, what kind of weapons they have, and then if there are injured people or where they may be. The call taker will actually go over the police radio and dispatch the officers, and they will continue to update them because they're getting the information the fastest. They will continue to update them from that position. Once we put the call in, it automatically goes to our fire dispatcher. So they get it and they start dispatching the ambulance and the fire personnel. It's very seamless and it's immediate. So being on the phone with us is not holding anything back. As a matter of fact, it's helping because as they're going, we're getting the information that they need.
When 911 is called for a hostile incident, an active shooter, we have a well-coordinated, unified public safety response in Henrico County. So you'll see law enforcement, fire department, and emergency medical services all respond swiftly.
You will expect a large police response, and not just if the incident is in Henrico County, for example, not just from the Henrico County Police Division, but we would expect to see law enforcement officers from the Henrico Sheriff's Office, from our surrounding jurisdictions, perhaps the state police, as well as our federal partners in law enforcement.
Command and control and the response to an active shooter event is entirely led by the local agency where the jurisdiction falls. The FBI will immediately coordinate with that local jurisdiction and provide them any and all resources they need, to include tactical resources, evidentiary resources, victim assistance, command and control, crisis management resources, anything that the local jurisdiction needs.
When the police first respond to an active shooter incident, their main goal is to neutralize the threat, which means to find the shooter and stop the shooter. So when they get on scene, they're not going to stop to help people. They're not going to stop to help evacuate the building. If someone's injured and wounded, they're going to bypass the injured and wounded. That's what they're taught to do, because every minute they stop to help somebody, someone else could be getting shot. So they want to make sure they minimize the additional lives lost. So their main goal is to go right towards the shooter.
The sooner the threat is neutralized, the more efficiently we can deal with any victims. We're able to insert, with police cover, ballistically protected firefighters into what we call a warm zone.
We as the public, we are the first responders, naturally. Law enforcement, by virtue of how these events play out, will never be directly the first ones there, and that's not their fault. They're going to get there very, very quickly. But what that means is we're going to have anywhere from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, where it's really up to ourselves to make the decisions that might really impact our lives.
Once any victims or bystanders are able to move to a location that they perceive to be safe, some basic first aid can make a huge difference in survivability of the victims. In a new Stop the Bleed program from Department of Homeland Security, there are 3 basic steps you can take. Direct pressure with your hands as a first step, a second step of applying a bulky dressing and pressure, and a third step of applying a tourniquet above an injury can make a huge difference in survivability to stop that arterial bleed.
If a situation arises where there's an active shooter incident and somebody you know is caught up in that incident, what we would ask is a couple things. We've got to ask for the public's patience in not responding to the scene and not overloading our 911 center by calling in and asking if their loved one is involved in this incident, because quite frankly, our 911 dispatchers are not going to know the answer to that.
What we'll do is we'll set up a public information officer at some point during the incident to put out information in the media. And some of that information they're going to put out is where the parents or family or loved ones can stage and get information. What we don't want is people responding into an incident and causing more chaos.
What we would ask is that people continue to monitor the news and the other outlets from which we disseminate information, which includes our Facebook page and other social media outlets that the county uses.
One of the main things we deal with are active shooters. Everybody thinks about active shooters because it's in the media a lot, but another problem we encounter is suspicious packages. You know, a lot of times people will see something, a box by a car out in the parking lot that doesn't look right, or a suitcase by a propane tank at a business, and they think, well, this is kind of odd, it's out of the ordinary, maybe I should notify the police.
When we talk about unattended versus suspicious packages, first of all is to know what the difference is between them. And I'll use our NASCAR races at Richmond International Raceway as an analogy for this. If during the course of the race weekend we find an empty cooler with the lid up, nothing in it, sitting in the middle of a parking lot, that would be an unattended package, but it would not be suspicious because to see a cooler at a NASCAR race would not be an unusual thing. If, on the other hand, we found a briefcase by one of the entry gates and it had wires coming out of it, it was making strange noises, it had vapors or mists, smelled funny, and just looked odd, that, on the other hand, would be a suspicious package.
Anything suspicious that you deem suspicious, do not touch it. Call the police. We have people, such as myself, such as other bomb techs in the division, that are trained to deal with these kinds of things. It's not your job to determine if something is suspicious or unattended. If you feel that way, if you feel that there's something suspicious about it, that's as far as you need to go.
What we don't want people to do is kind of just dismiss it and say, well, it looks suspicious, but I'm not going to call the police. You know, if you're ever in doubt of anything, you know, contact us. Same thing goes with suspicious persons. You know, if you have somebody that is loitering around an area, they've kind of just been hanging around all day, you know, they're not associated with the business. You know, if you think it's suspicious, give us a call.
What people need to understand is that active shooter situations are not random. People don't just snap, and they don't happen on the spur of the moment. They are all planned. Now, it may only be a few moments of planning, or it may be days, weeks, and months of planning.
There are many stages in the planning process for these kinds of situations, but it is vital that we catch these individuals in the first few stages. Once they get to the operational stage of actually leaving and trying to make it to their target, it's too late.
There are indicators that individuals can look for a potential active shooter and report those. Either somebody is posting things on social media about acquiring weapons or their intentions to use them to cause harm, or grievances they may have either in workplace or school or in their life. Sudden changes in somebody's disposition or an individual's disposition. If you have a concern, then report it.
You know, if you think it's suspicious, give us a call. They have a campaign called See Something, Say Something to the Department of Homeland Security. Again, it applies for terrorism, but it really applies for anything in law enforcement.
All of these unusual situations are worth investigating. The bottom line is we want to save lives.
If you hear of anything, any threats, anybody makes some statements that you think might be harmful to the public, you know, give us a call and we'll check it out. And that's what we're here for.
I think it is human nature to some degree to be very afraid and to be anxious and not know what to do. And I think the best way to help caveat that is by preparing, by mentally training ahead of time, physically training if you have that opportunity as a law enforcement, but just thinking about what will I do when I hear that noise? Who will I call? How will I close the door? How will I be able to evacuate in that space? But that kind of mental fortitude will not happen unless you thought about it before the fact.
Keep in mind the concepts of survivability. Run, hide, fight. And most importantly, if you see something, say something and report it to local law enforcement as soon as possible.